All right, welcome to the fourth and probably the final part of the pushing tutorial. So like I said, the last thing we need to do here, or the last two things we need to do is the animations and then making it so you can stop pushing box. So let's do the stop pushing first, because that'll be pretty easy. So back in the third person character, go to the event graph, and then, hold on, let me look at my other project. All right, okay, so right here, where we press the input interaction, we need to modify this a little bit. So instead of just going ahead and starting the pushing or starting to look for objects that are interactable, we want to first check if we are actually pushing something, because if we are, then we want to stop pushing it instead of doing this. So we can drag in our push component, and we just need to make a function here off of this that can return true if we're pushing something. So let's go into our push component, and then over here on the left, make a new function and call it is pushing object. And then we'll make this pure and const, since it's basically just returning true or false. It's not actually changing anything. And so we can drag in our current pushable. And if we're pushing something, then this will be valid. So we can say is valid, and we can just return that. Right. So if it's valid, then we can say we're pushing something. If it's not valid, then we're not pushing anything. And back in our third person character, we can use that and say is pushing object, and we can do a branch like so. Oh, actually, let's do, like I said, let's do a not here, just because I like the true to be the success case, I guess you could say. So if we're not pushing an object, then we'll go ahead and do like the stuff we were doing before, where we look for an object to push. Um, but if we are pushing an object, then we want to stop pushing it. So we can just say push component and push, and that will go into the false, just like that. All right. I don't think we actually wrote this in push yet, so we will need to do that. So let's do that real quick. So inside of here, this will be pretty straightforward. We're basically kind of just undoing what we did in the push or the begin push. So the first thing we want to do, we want to make sure that we are currently pushing something, because if they call in push and we're not actually pushing anything, then we really don't want to do anything. It's kind of like a weird situation. But so we'll convert this to a validated get, because again, this determines if we're pushing something or not. So if it's valid, then that means we are pushing something. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set this to be invalid, right? So that way, if they, call is pushing object, this won't be valid and it will return false. So we need to make sure we set this to nothing, which invalidates it. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to, again, do the opposite of what we did here. So we basically want to unattach it, and then we want to undo all of this stuff. So we can say get owner and cast to character, and then we'll just promote this to a local variable just to make things simple, and just call it again owning player, or sorry, not player, owning character, because it might not be a player. And then we want to detach the player, or sorry, the character from, well, yeah, we want to detach the character from the box. So we can drag off of this and say detach from actor. And we want to make sure we change these all to keep world so that he stays where he currently is when we detach him. And then we want to turn off that plane constraint that we set from before. So we can drag in our owning character and say set plane. Oh wait, we need to do that off the character movement component. Say character movement component. And we'll say set plane constraint enabled. And we'll just make sure we leave it as false this time. And then we want to set the orient rotation to movement back to true. So we can say set orient rotation to movement back to true. Come on. And then finally, we want to disable the tick of the component so that it no longer ticks. And we'll say set component tick enabled, and we'll set it to false. All right, so now we should be able to stop pushing things if we did this correctly. So if we hit play, and I come over here, and I start pushing, If I then press F, you can see it stops pushing and I can now walk around. One thing we need to fix, actually, I forgot about this, is we can currently walk while we are pushing it. So we need to fix that as well. So back in our third person character up here where we do the, where is it? Here, the move forward code and the move right code. We want to only do this if we're not pushing something. So we can drag in our push component and we'll say is pushing object and not boolean, and we'll do a branch like so. And then we just want to copy this and do the exact same thing down here. Oops. A little more room like that. There we go. So if we're not pushing something, then we will allow movement. And you might also want to do the same thing for jumping here. I'm just going to throw this in real quick, but we might want to do something like this as well. You know, if we're not pushing something, then, or if we're pushing something, then allow us to jump, otherwise don't. So now if we run this and we come over here, we push, we try to jump, or we try to walk around, it doesn't let us. We're basically just stuck here. And again, we'll hook up the animation here in a second. And then if we press F, we're back to going around and we can jump again and everything's good to go. Okay, so kind of did this really ugly, but yeah, you get the idea. Right, so the animation, that is the last thing we need to do here, I think. So let me go back to my other project here and open up my animation file so that I can have something to reference. So give me 1 second. Third person mannequin animations pushing. Okay. Right. So back here in our content folder under mannequins animations. So this is where we added our push and our low animations at the very beginning. So what we want to do is we want to create a simple little blend space out of these so that we can blend his hands based off the height of the thing he's pushing. So we can right click and say blueprint, no, animation, and then blend space 1D for 1 dimension. And then make sure you select the skeleton of your character. And we will call this BS underscore push. And so open this guy up. And so inside of here, we want to drag in our push low. Or actually, before we do that, on the horizontal axis over here on the left, we want to change this. We want to change this to be height. And then we want to change the number of grid divisions to 2, or actually just 1. And then the min axis value and the max axis value. So I'm going to set these to 90 and 156. And those might look like magic numbers, and they kind of are, but not really. They're basically how high his hands are when his hands, like when he's in this low animation versus the high animation. So like, for example, so if we drag in the push low here and push high, and then where's that little green thing? I might have to close it and reopen it so I can get that little green thing back. There we go. So you can see what this 90 means is that when his hands are all the way over here on the left, or all the way down, saying his hands are at a height of 90 above the ground, and when they're all the way over here, they're at 156. So if you find that these values are slightly off for you for whatever reason, or you're using different animations, you can adjust these values. So, you know, for example, like if you find out that his hands are actually at 80, then you would just set this to 80 here, and then everything else will just work fine. And if it's somewhere in between, then you can see he kind of interpolates his hands to be in the right spot, depending on what he's pushing. So we just need to add this to his animation graph now. So if we go to our third person character and click on his mesh, and we click on this little magnifying glass next to the anim class, excuse me, it'll bring us to the animation graph that he's using, or the animation blueprint rather. And so let's open this guy up, and then we want to go to the event graph, and we basically need to get a couple values from our character. We need to get whether or not he's pushing something, and then we also need to get the height of the thing he's pushing. So let's see. I always hate their animation graph, how ugly it is. So we're going to make it a little bit nicer here. So right click and say events, blueprint, begin play. I don't like how they do this each time. Or I wish they would just save the, never mind, just copy try get pawn owner and say cast to third person character or whatever the character is that you're using. And we're just going to go ahead and promote this to a variable. And we'll just call this the owning player, I guess. And then we can also make this private. And so I guess we'll just leave this. Let me just straighten it out a little bit. Okay. So after they do all this stuff, we want to kind of do something similar where we want to use this owning player and we want to get some values from him. So we first of all want to get, like I said, we want to get whether or not he's pushing something. And so we can get that from the push component. So we can say owning player, get push component, and then we can use that function we wrote is pushing object, and we can promote this to a variable. So right click, promote to variable, and then we can just call this is pushing. And then the other thing we need is the height value of the thing he's pushing. We only need to get that if he's actually pushing something, so we can just do a branch here. And if he is pushing something, then we need to get push height. So we're going to have to make a function inside of the push component to get the push height. So let's see here. Back in our push component, let's make another function and call it get pushable height. It's the height of the thing we're pushing. And so this is going to be sort of complicated. It's just it's just simple math, but it's not quite as simple as returning a value because we basically want to get the height of the thing above where our feet are. So we're going to start out with a sequence node. So hold down S and left click, and this will get us a sequence node. And then we're going to add an output parameter as a float, and this is going to be our height. And then for the then one, we're going to return 0. And we're basically just doing that because if anything fails here along then 0, it's just going to come down here. It's going to return a height of 0. So this is like the fail case. But to get the actual height, what we want to do is we want to drag in our current pushable. We want to make sure it is valid. So we will convert it to a validated get. And then we want to get the static mesh from it because that's the actual visible thing that we're pushing. So we can say get static mesh. And we want to get the bounds of this thing. So we can say get local bounds. And then we want to split these both. So split and split. And we want to subtract the max z from the min z. So we'll say float with minus like this. And make sure you have them crisscrossed. You want the max z on top and the min z on the bottom. And we want to add that to our current pushable's location. All right, so we'll drag in the current pushable and we'll say get actor location. And we want to take this and split it. We want to add this, say float plus. We want to add the z value. And then this is basically the top of the object in world space. So we can promote to local variable. And we'll call this the top of object. And so we want to basically calculate how high the top of object is above the feet of the character. So we just next need to calculate the feet of the character. So we can say get owner cast to character. And we want to get the location of the actor. So get actor location. We also want to get his capsule and figure out, or we want to subtract half the capsule height from his location. So that way we can get his feet. So let's say get capsule half height, or sorry, get capsule component, and then get scaled capsule half height. We want to say this minus, so float minus, And so this is going to be his feet. So we can promote to local variable and say, call it the feet of character. And so now we have the top of the object, so like the top of the box, and we have the feet of the character. So the push height, or the height of his hands, is going to be the top of the object minus the feet of the character. So float minus the feet of the character. And that is the height, and we will just go ahead and return that. So I'm going to add return node. Oops. Add return node. And we want to return this, and then we can make this pure and const as well. And so just to kind of recap here, start out, if any of these fail, like if this fails or if this fails or whatever, it's going to just return 0. But if it makes it all the way through, then it's going to return the actual height. And again, the height is just the top of the object minus the feet of the character subtracted from each other. Okay, so now we have a way to get the height of where his hand should be. So back in our third person animation blueprint, we can, let me go back there actually, we can say get pushable height, and we can promote this to a variable as well. Hook that up to the true. And then I think that is good. So we just now need to actually hook that into the animation graph. So in the animation graph, if we go inside of this default state machine, we can hook it up inside of here. And we basically want to just hook it up to idle and run because you're not going to be able to push things while you're jumping. So we only really need to hook it up here. So if we drag in our BS push, and we'll just call this pushing, that'll hook that up. And so we can add a transition node, which will tell us when we can transition to it. And we also want to add one to going back. And so we just need to fill these out here. So to go from idle to pushing, if we double click on this, we can edit it. The transition rule is basically just this pushing variable, right? Because if we're pushing, then we can transition to it. And then we can come back and we need to do the opposite for this one. So for this guy, we just want to say if we're not pushing. So pushing, say not Boolean. And then I think the very last thing we need to do here is hook up that height. So if we come back and we go into pushing, you can see it's asking us for a height right here. And so we will just pass in our height. And I think we might be good now. So if we press play and we come over here and we start pushing, you can see he starts pushing the object. So you will notice he's a little bit far away, and that's just because, oh, we actually are getting an error. Accessing none, trying to read owning player. So let's actually do, right, we actually need to change this a little bit. So dragging the owning player inside of the animation blueprint and say convert to validated get and hook that up here. We can actually just delete these nodes and hook that up there. And then we want to make sure that we rehook up this to here. And then also right here for the get velocity, we want to copy this owning player and hook it in here as well. All right, so if we go ahead and play this and we go over here, when we push it, you can see, well, so his hands aren't quite in the correct spot, and that's just because we kind of eyeballed where these go. So if he's a little bit too far away, then you can just scoot these closer. So I'll make it like 140 or something, and negative 140, like so. And now let's see. So now it's a lot closer. You can obviously play with it to get it perfect. And then one thing I want to show as well. So like if we change this to like, let's say, maybe the chair or something. It's about the same height. Well, this is fine. So if it was something that's a little bit taller, you might have to find a better model than this. Let me just move this back here. Let me delete this guy because it only really makes sense to be able to push this thing from behind. So I don't know if this is any taller or not, but if you find a taller model, you'll see his hands will actually go up to whatever the height of the model is. So if you find a higher model, this one's a little higher than the box. You can see, so his hands go up a little bit higher as he pushes it. And that'll all happen like totally dynamically. And you can say I also changed it so we can only push it from behind. So you can no longer push it from the side or anything like that. So it's a really easy system to get set up. Like I said, the props pack is the one I used if you want to look at the props pack. It has a lot of good things that you can push around. If you guys enjoyed the video, I appreciate a like and subscribe. I spent a lot of time working on this one to get it really robust and working well for you guys. So I really appreciate a like and subscribe. I also have a Discord server and a Patreon. All that information is in the link if you guys want to support me there or just join the Discord server to hang out. That's always super welcome, super appreciated. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.